You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, everybody, let's get into it and pull that tarp. My guest today is my good friend, Alan Stein Jr., speaker, author, performance expert on all things high performance and raising your game. We'll get into it all. Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, Alan.
Oh, my goodness. It's so great to be with you, my friend.
It's so great to see you, Alan. We've spent a lot of time keeping in touch, especially during the pandemic here. I want to dig into your career, the work that you're doing. You have an unprecedented record, 15 plus years working with some of the best basketball players on the face of the earth. And over the last few years, you've been translating those lessons and those insights from those experiences to help anybody foster their performance, improve their performance. And as you say, raise your game. You are the author of one of my favorite books. I'm going to flash it up here for the viewers and share it with the listeners, Raise Your Game. If you haven't read Raise Your Game, you have to go out and pick up a copy on Amazon or find out information on Alan's website. One of my favorite reads. It's chock full of insight. Let's get into it, Alan. You and I have talked about the Everybody Pulls the Tarp mantra. And to me, the Everybody Pulls the Tarp mantra means that high-performing individuals and teams are willing to do things that are outside the bounds of the job description, outside of what's expected of them. You talk about a concept very regularly called the unseen hours, the things that happen when nobody's watching that make a huge difference in your success. And when I hear you talk about it, I think they're pulling the tarp. Why don't you share for our listeners and viewers what the unseen hours means to you and how it powers success?
Well, when I was in the direct basketball training space, I always wanted to make sure that players knew that it was the unseen hours. It was the time when the cameras weren't rolling, the cheerleaders weren't dancing, and there was nobody in the stands. It was the work they put in then that would ultimately determine how well they'd perform come game time. And if you really look at the sheer math of it all, most of our lives are spent during those unseen hours. You know, I mean, you and I will be together today, thankfully, for 30, 35 minutes. But there were several unseen hours leading up to this interview and this conversation that both of us had to prepare for. And both of us did our due diligence to make sure that we would show up for this conversation, which we can consider the game, as our best selves and ready to make a maximum contribution. So it's so important that whether you're a teacher, a sales professional, or an athlete, that you really understand that it's the preparation and discipline that you show when no one else is watching that will ultimately dictate how well you perform when everybody's watching.
Let's dig into that a little bit more, Alan. There's a story in your book that's one of my favorites of all time. You talk about your friend Dave Bullwinkle, a scout at the time for the Chicago Bulls, and you guys are meeting up while he's in town scouting some players. And he says, hey, meet me at the arena at 11 a.m. And you're a little confused because the game's not till 4 or 5 o'clock. Talk about that. It's really an incredible story.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite stories because it was so impactful in my life. And one of the things I try and do in my keynote programs and my workshops is to share first-person stories of things that really had a big impact on me that I believe have very tangible and practical life lessons that everyone can apply. And, you know, as you set up so perfectly, Dave Bullwinkle was a scout for the Chicago Bulls. And he was coming in town here to the Washington, D.C. area to watch Georgetown versus Syracuse. And this was well over a decade ago. And both of those teams at the time had 3 or 4 potential lottery picks on their roster. I mean, this was the heydays when the Big East was the original Big East and Georgetown and Syracuse were 2 national powers. And Dave needed to do his due diligence to make sure that he did all of his homework so that whoever the Chicago Bulls chose to select with their first round pick, they were going to be making a very wise decision. And as you said, he wanted us to get to the arena much earlier than everybody else. And I was a little confused on why, because, you know, at that time I was figuring he wanted to really watch the game time. He wanted to see how the players performed under pressure. You know, he wanted to see their body language and how they dealt with adversity. Were they coachable? And while that stuff is important, certainly when you're evaluating a player, he wanted to see how the players behaved when no one else knew that they were being watched. Going back to those unseen hours, he wanted to see how the players behave when they didn't think anyone was evaluating them. So he wanted to get to the arena so early to watch their pregame shoot around and see, were they being coachable and listening to coaches' instructions when they were breaking down, offensive and defensive sets? Were they taking their warm-up serious? Were they respectful to the building service workers and the other people that were in the arena early? He took more notes on a yellow legal pad 5 hours before tip-off than he did when the actual game started. And what I found so fascinating, and I certainly would never name names. I'm not in the business of calling players out and certainly would never want to diminish anyone. But I remember vividly that there were 2 or 3 players combined on the 2 teams that really raised their draft status because of how they behaved. They were locked in. They listened with their eyes. They were respectful. They were good teammates. They were given high fives during shoot around. And then there were 2 or 3 players that really significantly lowered their draft status because they did the opposite of those things. They were just kind of mailing it in. They weren't really listening. They were kind of looking down at the floor when their coach was talking, or they weren't being respectful, or, when it was time to be locked in and do some shooting drills, they were kind of goofing around. So he could tell then which players he would recommend that the Bulls would invest eventually millions and millions of dollars in. And I just thought that was fascinating. So the real lesson that I pulled from that is I try to live my life in a manner that I'm always behaving in a way as if people are watching, as if somebody is evaluating me, if somebody that I truly care about and respect is always keeping an eye on what I'm doing during those unseen hours. And when you can align your behavior and your beliefs in such a manner that you're always behaving, then you don't have to worry about turning it on and off. You're just always on and you're always doing what you believe is right.
Do you think that's something that folks are born with or can be learned and developed over time? It sounds like for you, you had this epiphany in that interaction with your friend who was scouting the Chicago Bulls, but the athletes and some of the elite performers and executives that you've worked with over the years, is that something that you just think is ingrained, or is this something that people really have to pay attention to developing, that ability to behave like somebody's watching all the time?
Like many things, I think it's a healthy combination of both. I don't necessarily think there's something in our DNA that increases our ability to do that, but I certainly know, especially now as the father of 3 young children, how important modeling is. So certainly, if your parents or your guardians or whoever took care of you when you were younger, if they modeled having high character during the unseen hours, then I think you'll more than likely display that as well. But even if you weren't, if you did not have great role models in that regard, it is absolutely can be and should be a learned characteristic. And where I really see this coming into play in particular is with social media. I know that I want to make sure that there is alignment between my beliefs and my behavior, both online and offline. I want to make sure that the stuff that I put forth for the rest of the world to consume, content on the different social channels or my podcast or blog or whatever, is in alignment with the way that I actually live my life. That I don't want to post that I'm doing one thing or believe one thing and then actually act in a different manner behind closed doors. One of the best compliments I can ever get is when I meet someone at a speaking engagement and they say, man, I feel like I already know you because I've been following and consuming your content for a while. And that's exactly who I'm seeing now on stage. And that's exactly who I'm sitting here at lunch with. I think having that alignment is really, really important. So I think the lesson that I learned from Coach Bullwinkle, I already knew and was most likely exercising that to a decent degree, but he really highlighted it and emphasized it. And that which gets emphasized will get improved. So I think it's important for us to always remember that.
A few weeks ago, Alan, on this show, former Clemson star quarterback Taj Boyd was my guest. And Taj shared with me a story in more detail that built upon a story that John Gordon, who I know you know very well, had told me about last summer. Taj, when he was the star quarterback at Clemson, and they would go to movies as a team on Friday nights before home games. After the movie was over, Taj would lead the team in cleaning up the movie theater. It started by picking up trash, sweeping a few things, and then they were getting blowers and the whole team was pitching in. And he felt this belief inside him that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think there's a lot of parallels to what Taj was saying and what you're describing there, Alan. Taj believed that the way he was going to act on the field between the lines as the star quarterback at Clemson had to transcend to his behavior everywhere he went and everywhere he continues to go. And not only did that build a framework for him to operate, John Gordon told me, Dabo Swinney told him, and Taj believes that transcended the entire culture. That if Taj Boyd, the star quarterback, is willing to clean movie theaters, then we better all be willing to put in the extra work, do whatever it takes to pull the tarp, to be successful as an individual and as a team and program. Some thoughts on that? Are there examples of things that you've seen throughout the years that just blow you away, like a star athlete or an elite executive doing something that's that tarp pulling moment, like Taj pulling the tarp and cleaning the trash up?
Absolutely. I can think of three examples right off the top of my head. The first is there's a huge sign at the Facebook headquarters in New York that says nothing is someone else's job. And I just love that. To me, that's the epitome of, everybody pulls the tarp. It's basically saying there's not a single thing that goes on here that every single one of us should not be willing to do or to contribute to. And I love that. The other examples I was thinking of, one, I had the great honor and privilege of working for Coach Mike Jones at DeMatha Catholic High School. I was the performance coach for the basketball program there from 2010 to 2016. And Coach Jones has recently moved on to the collegiate ranks. He's now the associate head coach for Virginia Tech men's basketball and just one of the finest leaders that I've ever met. And one of the things I loved about Coach Jones was he literally lived the everybody pulls the tarp mentality. He would personally sweep the floor before every single practice, every single workout, and every single game. And he did that for a few different reasons. But the most important reason was, and he told me, was to remind himself that there is no job that's beneath him. That even though he is technically the CEO of DeMatha basketball and he is the head coach and could easily assign a player or an assistant or a manager or a building service worker, he could get somebody else to sweep the floor. But he believed in doing that because he wanted to remind himself that he's willing to do and should be willing to do every single job. And he made sure that he would do that like almost right before practice because he wanted the players and the other coaches to see him doing that when they came in. Not for any type of adoration or accolades, but just to set that example and model the example that all of us should be willing to do anything that's necessary for DeMatha to be successful. The other thing that I remember vividly, I'm very good friends, and he's been a mentor of mine for a long time, of Jay Bilas of ESPN. Jay was actually kind enough to write the foreword to my book, and I've worked his camp. He holds the Jay Bilas Skills Camp at Queen's University down in Charlotte every year, and it's for a group of players that are most likely going to be Division II or Division III level players. So they're really, really good high school players, but they're not the top 100 players that most of the events are put on for. And one of the very first things Jay does during the camp introduction, when all the players are just getting there, is he brings the building service staff out and has them standing behind him. And he introduces the building service staff to the players by name. And he says, look, guys, these folks here have a job to do. And their job is to make sure that this building and this arena is as clean as possible so that you have a beautiful and safe environment to work on your craft and do what you love to do. And we will not do anything that makes their job any harder. If you see a piece of trash, whether it's yours or not, you pick it up. If you see a towel over on the ground, whether it's yours or not, you put it where it's supposed to go. I want this to be the easiest week these folks have ever had at work, and really makes it a point that the players understand that. And it's really, all of these things are in perfect alignment with the premise of your show and your major core belief, which I absolutely love.
Well, I love all of those stories, Alan. And I tell people all the time, a lot of times I mentor folks early on in their careers, and I tell people the one phrase you should never say, going back to your Facebook office example, is you should never say that's not my job, because everything is your job, right? There's nothing that's not your job. At the end of the day, your job is whatever in the moment is best for the team, the organization, the community. I fundamentally believe that at my core. The other thing that I know you're passionate about is the focus on the basics, right? And at the end of the day, pulling the tarp doesn't require you to be a rocket science, doesn't require you to have any innate ability or athleticism or any training or any God-given talent. It requires you to do some simple things, just like Jay Bilas does there, which is show respect, set an example. The same thing that Coach Jones at DeMatha and now at Virginia Tech is doing. These are simple things. You spend so much time in your book, in the content that you put out, talking about the fact that elite performers do the basics really well. Talk about that for a little bit. How important are the basics?
Well, before I touch on that, with what you just said, because it's incredibly insightful, I want to make sure that we kind of double click on that. Ultimately, everybody pulling the tarp is a choice to care. It's a choice to be of service and or to be unselfish. And it's a choice to make a commitment to something bigger than yourself. And all of those things are decisions that we get to make. You just said it so perfectly. This has nothing to do with any inherent traits you were born with or any athletic ability or anything. These are all conscious choices that every single person on any team or organization can make. It doesn't matter if you're the top of the org chart or the bottom of the org chart. You simply have to make the choice to give of yourself unselfishly for the betterment of the group so that you can make a contribution to something bigger than yourself. And that is not necessarily easy to do. It's not necessarily our automatic default, but it's something we can all work to improve and consciously make better decisions so that we do that. And I'm a huge believer that being a great teammate, which in essence is running parallel and congruent with everybody pulls the tarp, is one of the most important skill sets a human being can possess. That you'll always be gainfully employed and you'll always be a part of some really great teams if you are a world-class teammate. And, this is kind of that mindset of aim to be the best for the team. Don't worry about being the best on the team. Aim to be the best for the team. And another Jay Bilasism that I've always loved is be the type of teammate that you'd want to play with. We'd all want to play with other people that are willing to pull the tarp. So now we need to model that and do that ourselves. But back to your original question, yes, I'm a big believer in the basics and a big believer in fundamentals. And I do believe that not only the highest performers and the most successful people, but also the happiest and the most fulfilled people in the world are the ones that have learned to master the basics and get past the sheer monotony of repetition. Like they understand that getting good at the basics is the foundation to which the rest of their house is built. And there are basics in any area of our life. If you want to be good at the game of basketball, then make sure you're getting good at the basics of footwork and of shooting mechanics and so forth. If you want to be good at sales, or you want to be good in your marriage, or you want to be a good podcast host, there are basic fundamentals that will determine whether or not you excel in those different areas. And I find that unfortunately, many people try to skip over the basics because they're always in search of something new and flashy and sexy, and they're always looking for a hack or a shortcut. But the real juice is in the basics.
People talk all the time about these elite performers, right? We have the Olympics upon us. We have, NBA performers that you've worked closely with over the years. People assume, I think, that these elite performers are training in a different way. They're training different skill sets. At the end of the day, somebody like Kobe Bryant probably just puts up thousands of more free throws during his practices than the average person, right? I mean, obviously there's some God-given talent when you talk about folks like the late Kobe Bryant and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry in the basketball pantheons that you've traveled in. But at the end of the day, you have to believe they're just doing the basic things over and over and over again in many ways.
Yes. For thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of repetitions. Now, they do very task-specific game-like repetitions. They make sure that they've got competent coaching and someone to offer real-time feedback so that they can make little tweaks to each and every repetition. But yeah, you said it perfectly. It's the sheer amount of repetition during the unseen hours and commitment to the basics. I don't believe he's competing in this Olympics, but I'm pretty sure all of your listeners know who Michael Phelps is, the most decorated Olympian of all time. And I've never seen him train personally, but I've listened to several interviews with him and I've read several books by him and about him. I mean, I think if any of us took a slice out of his training to just watch Michael Phelps train, he would be doing the basics. He would be in the pool lap after lap, working on a stroke technique, he'd be doing different things. But I don't think there'd be anything sexy or anything revolutionary about the way that he would train. He would just try to get in more perfect repetitions in training than the person he knew was going to be his biggest competition when the Olympics actually rolled around. And to me, that's one of the major keys and first steps to being successful is identify what it is that you want to aim for excellence in. I gave a few examples earlier. Maybe you want to be excellent as a sales professional. Maybe you want to be excellent in your marriage. Maybe you want to be an excellent podcast host. And then figure out what are the basic skill sets and building blocks needed to be great in this endeavor, and then find ways to work on those every single day. And the beautiful part is you get the compounding interest of consistency, that if you're willing to focus on the basics, you don't have to do them for 10 hours a day. A focused 20 to 30 minutes on something with task-specific repetitions every single day will add up brilliantly. So it's not even just about time. It's also understanding that consistency is really, really important in this picture.
Let's go back a moment. You talked about real-time feedback at the beginning of your response there, Alan. The elite performers are creating a situation where they're not only willing to take, but they're intentional about taking and soliciting real-time feedback and then acting on it. How can we all go about in our own lives making sure we're setting up that feedback loop and that we have folks giving us the constructive criticism that we need to improve?
Well, the key is, and you just said it there perfectly, is we want to make sure that we're going to have competent coaching and we're going to have someone that knows exactly what to look for, especially if you're going to be talking about the nuances of a craft. I'll just speak from the first person. I aim for excellence and I want to be an extraordinary keynote speaker. That doesn't mean I ask the opinion of anybody and everybody walking the street. Hey, what do you think about my keynote? Because most likely all they're going to do is offer some preferences. Hey, I like this story, or hey, maybe you should do this a little different. That smattering of feedback I don't think is targeted enough. What I do is I actually have a speaking coach, and I have a few different people that have already honed their craft really well in the speaking industry, and I ask them for very specific feedback, specific things to look for, specific things that I might be trying to work on. And this might be from a content standpoint, or it might be from a delivery standpoint, but I want to make sure that they're giving me something that will be tangible and practical and that I can use. And then I also make sure that I film every single one of my talks, and then I go back and watch it afterwards, which is as close to real-time feedback as I can get, since I'm actually in the moment when I'm speaking. But it's actually nice because then I can kind of step aside and almost be a spectator to myself as I'm watching the film. And it's amazing. There are definitely times where my perception of how I'm delivering something on stage is different from my perception of how I'm watching myself as if I was in the audience. So I think it's important to be able to look at it from all different angles. And then with any type of feedback, once you discern what is actually valuable feedback to help you improve, then you want to slowly start to integrate that into your practices, into your rehearsals, into the next thing that you'll be doing.
I think there is it's a tough balance, right? Because you have to balance the feedback that you get, and you can't implement everything. To me, you have to filter. You have to create a good system like you described of getting competent feedback, constructive feedback. You don't want people who are just going to always tell you all the things that you want to hear and tell you positives. I always want people who are going to tell me constructive things and are going to tell me, things I can do better. I love that. I inhale that stuff. But then once you have that, I think you do, like you say, have to apply that appropriate filter to make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself with so much change that it becomes this stressor that slows you from implementing it.
For sure. Well, let's just use, I'm a podcast host as well, so that's something else that you and I share. But let's just use you as a podcast host right now as an example. There's two buckets of feedback that I think would be important. One, because I know you personally, I know how important it is to you to be of service to others and to deliver a show that is going to impact and give people some nuggets and some things that they can use. So I know how important that is to you. So getting some listener feedback and polling your listeners and asking them, which types of guests do you like best? Or which of my line of questioning have you found most helpful? Or which, just kind of corralling some of that information, I think can help you better serve your audience. And since that's something that's really important to you, that type of feedback is vital. But I also know that you'd want to poll other people that have podcasts, other podcast hosts, potentially people that may have a show with many more episodes or maybe a bigger listener base or have accomplished some things that you might want to do with your show. Let's say a Tim Ferriss or a Dak Shepard or somebody like that. And you might want to get some feedback from them on the actual tactical and tangible side of building a show and growing a show, and what are some best practices and what are some things I could do to expand my listenership, and what are some things I could do to attract sponsors, what are things I could do to make my interview style potentially, you fill in the blank with whatever adjective you want. So there's different types of feedback in that regard. And I do the same thing with speaking. Like, I want feedback from the audience, not on my craft, I don't need to hear from someone in the audience unless they're a professional speaker or a speaking coach on how to get better at my craft. What I want to hear is, am I hitting the target? Am I actually delivering a keynote that you find meaningful and memorable? And is this something that's going to help you think, act, and move differently moving forward? That is really important to me. And then I go to my coaches and my mentors on the speaking side to say, hey, how can I punch up my content, make it more impactful? How can I make my stories hit a little bit harder? How can I actually be more charismatic or use my physicality better on the stage? So it's also important to remember there's a variety of different feedback. So we need to make sure we're crystal clear on exactly what we're trying to get when we ask for feedback from what specific audience.
I love that, Alan. And while we're on the subject of feedback, if anybody has feedback on how to constructively improve this show or my interview style or the podcast, you know how to find me. It's Andrew at everybodypullsthetarp.com. I want your feedback. I want to know what you want to hear more of on Everybody Pulls the Tarp or what you want to hear less of. Send it all. I want to know. Alan, I want to go back to consistency. You talked about consistency. When I think about consistency, the other word that pops into my head is discipline. Do you have the discipline to do the little things, to pull the tarp when you need to pull the tarp? Talk about discipline for a second. How do you build discipline? How do you sustain discipline?
You know, it's funny. Most of what people talk about, especially on social media, and most of what sells is motivation. In fact, a lot of people call me a motivational speaker, and that's not what I would consider myself, but I understand what they mean by it. And while I do think to a degree, motivation absolutely plays a role, I don't think motivation is near as important as discipline. I think motivation is overrated, and I think discipline is underrated, at least in what we're talking about. And that's because motivation is sexy. Discipline's a little bit less sexy. It's kind of going back to those unseen hours. But I really believe discipline is definitely not something either you have it or you don't. Discipline comes down to your decision making. Any person at any given time with any given choice can choose to make a disciplined decision. Now, if you choose not to do that, and then you start telling yourself a story that I'm just not a disciplined person, I can't get up in the morning and do this, or this, that's just a story you're telling yourself. Every single moment of every single day, you have an opportunity to make a more disciplined decision. And once you can start doing that, then you'll start to get some consistency behind that. You'll start to build that no different than a muscle. I say very proudly, but hopefully with some humility, that I'm pretty disciplined in most areas of my life. And that's not by accident. That's because I've worked on that discipline muscle, and I've made disciplined decisions, even when I didn't want to, when it wasn't convenient, or when I didn't, feel like it, but I still found a way to do that. Now, I'm not batting 1,000, and I'm certainly far from perfect, but I'm okay with that because I'm not striving for perfection. I'm striving for progress. And can I make more disciplined decisions more consistently in certain areas of my life? That's where I'm trying to go. But yeah, discipline is incredibly important. And when I think of discipline, I think of a few different things. One, it's honoring your word, especially to yourself, in doing what you said you were going to do long after the mood at which you said it has gone. It's very easy. If I listen to one of your podcasts and I get really motivated and really excited, you have some amazing guests, you ask great questions, and I say to myself, man, I'm feeling great right now. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm going to go for a 5-mile run. Andrew and his guest have got me really pumped up. Well, I might not be in that same emotional state tomorrow morning when I have to go for that run. And the only thing that's going to determine whether or not I do will be my discipline and whether or not I make a disciplined decision. Because at that point, the motivation is already fleeting. It's already left. So it's, am I willing to honor the word that I have to myself, that I'm going to go for this run long after the mood at which I said it has been gone? And then there was another, and I think this is credited to Bobby Knight, the infamous coach from Indiana. But he said, discipline is doing what you need to do, doing it when you need to do it, doing it to the best of your ability, and doing it that way as often as possible. That's discipline. Can I put my best foot forward and make the most meaningful contribution, do the best reps possible, and do that as often as I can? And I really think that's a good way to look at discipline.
Alan, that's a great segue. Before we wrap up in a couple minutes, I want to talk a little bit about college basketball. I know that's and college sports in general, because I think, obviously it's been a hot topic lately with the name, image, and likeness stuff that's been going on in the news, and this opportunity that athletes have at the college level to take advantage of some of those opportunities. But one of the interesting things to me, and I've talked to, like you, a lot of elite college coaches from a variety of different sports. And I think there are leadership lessons that we can learn because college coaches have to essentially rebuild all the time. The roster is always changing, especially in basketball and football. Sometimes the best players are leaving to go pro very quickly. You're in a constant rebuild. What can leaders in any aspect of life, business, community, sports, learn from elite college coaches and how they build that culture that sustains itself and stays consistent, regardless of essentially the personnel on the field or court?
The college coaches that do that the best, and I'm thinking specifically basketball and football. So whether you're talking about a Coach K at Duke or you're talking about a Nick Saban at Alabama, both of which have fairly high turnover because a good portion of their players do eventually go pro, and many of them go pro before their 4 years at their university is up. What both of those guys, as just examples, there's hundreds of coaches that do it well. The main consistent red thread is the culture that they've created, is their core beliefs. Their personnel and their recruits may change every year, but their core beliefs don't. They may have new players on and off the roster every single season, but their culture does not waver. The things that they really believe, those things are going to be consistent. And then they work to recruit the best and most talented and most skilled players possible that fit into that culture. Coach K does not try, and I know he's entering his last year of his iconic career, but he doesn't recruit every single 5-star player. He only recruits the ones that he believes can fit into the Duke culture and can accept his style of coaching and that he can build a relationship with. So, I could think of a whole handful of elite level players that Duke never chose to recruit, not because they weren't good enough. And I'm not even saying because they were, there wasn't anything wrong with them. They just would not fit into that Duke culture. So to me, the consistency comes from your culture, which basically stems from your core beliefs and the relationships that you create. If those things can stay consistent, then your program's success level will also be consistent instead of these ebbs and flows. When we have some good players, we're pretty good. When we don't, we're not. They're consistent all the way through.
How do you think this name, image, likeness stuff is going to change that culture building for college sports programs? Because now presumably you're going to have athletes that are going to be, some are going to be making money, some are going to be not going to be making money, some are going to be making a lot of money. And do you think that changes the dynamics at all? Do you think that the challenge gets tougher for college coaches?
Oh, it most certainly will. Anytime we have a change, whether it's change that's initiated by us or it's change that's imposed upon us, and things, are going to be different than they were, there's going to be some challenges. There's going to be some adversity. There's going to be a learning curve. So yes, absolutely. But back to what we were saying before, the best coaches, they'll be the ones that acclimate the quickest. They'll be the ones that figure out the best way to handle these new nuances and the best way to adjust their recruiting or adjust the way they treat their players or adjust certain opportunities. They'll be the ones that do. And it doesn't mean they'll always get it right. It doesn't mean they'll be perfect, but they'll make mistakes just like everyone else, but they'll learn from their mistakes and then they'll quickly adjust the volume as needed and then be able to move on to something else. Regardless of where one falls on this issue. And I'm a huge advocate of the college athletes, and I think this is long overdue, and I'm actually really excited for them. Every area of our world and of our lives is constantly in flux and is constantly changing, and things need to be updated. It's taken plenty of time for us to get to this point. I think it's actually a good thing. And I, as a college sports fan, I'm really interested in seeing how these nuances work. And, our team's still able to maintain a certain culture that they've built when you'll have some players that are earning significantly more money than other players that are on the team. And does that do anything to change the dynamic and the camaraderie and the cohesion and the chemistry? These are all things that we'll see. But I know the best leaders in college sports will figure it out, and they will find a way, even though they don't control the decision that was made, they'll find a way to respond to it in a way that moves them forward and actually enriches their program and the players and coaches on it.
They sure will, Alan. I know you said motivation is fleeting, but I sure have a lot of it right now after talking to you, as I always do when you and I connect. And I know our listeners and viewers are going to have a lot of pent-up motivation ready to go. But as you say, it's not about motivation. It's about some motivation, but it's also about discipline, consistency, and all those things. Alan, this has been So much fun. We're going to have to do it again sometime. Thank you for pulling the tarp, doing what you do, and helping all of us raise our game. Let me flash it up here one more time. Alan's book, Raise Your Game. Listeners, viewers, you got to go check it out. Alan, where can everybody find more information about all the work and content that you put out?
The easiest thing to do is just go to alansteinjr.com. You can also go to strongerteam.com. I have a variety of different resources there as well. As you mentioned, you can just search Raise Your Game wherever you get your books and or audio books. And I'm also very easily found on social media at Alan Stein Jr. I love engaging with folks on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So if there was part of our conversation that resonated, whether it's something you agree with and want to talk more about, or maybe even something you fundamentally disagree with and would like to have a professional debate, by all means, shoot me a message on social or a DM and I'll be quick to get back to you.
Alan, this has been so much fun. Keep pulling the tarp, all right, my friend?
Likewise, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my monthly email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.